illness is more common than ever. Fatigue, gut issues, hormonal imbalances, yet most traditional medicine just treats the symptoms. What if we could go deeper? Today, we're talking with Dr. Imran Khan, a leading functional medicine physician who specializes in getting to the root cause of health issues. We'll cover why functional medicine is changing the game and how to optimize your body from the inside out, and also what steps you can take to change your health and take charge. Dr. Khan, welcome to the show. Let's start here. What made you shift from conventional medicine to a more functional whole body approach?
Well, thank you, Dan, for having me. My healthcare journey starts back with a traditional medical doctorate degree. So I went through the traditional training, school, residency, and a lot of the time for many of functional medicine people who didn't know what functional medicine was, I didn't when I started, was my own personal health journey. So myself, I suffered with asthma, reactive airway disease, and I was getting frustrated that why was this getting worse and worse as I was getting older? And I kept feeling that there was layers of an onion that kept, chiseling away, peeling away, and I just never quite was able to get the full picture together. And something inside me wasn't happy with the answer of just take this puffer whenever you feel a little bit tight and, we'll make sure you have your refills. So I started looking a little bit more into the root cause, kind of the question of why is it there as opposed to what we could do about it. And that's kind of a major paradigm shift of thought for the traditional medical doctors or establishment. We're very good at prospectively saying, well, we could do this, this, and this. But often the question when somebody's asked, well, why is it there? We like to use a fancy term like idiopathic, or we don't know. But that question is generally isn't explored very well. And that's kind of where my curiosity, the seed was planted, so to speak.
It's a big shift. What were some of the biggest gaps you saw in traditional medicine that made you rethink the system?
Well, one of the things I reflect on is, med school traditionally is about 4 years. The first 2 years, it depends on your curriculum, but how I was taught was the first 2 years was teaching you about how things work, what's the natural order of the body, biochemistry, anatomy, just kind of looking at the marvel of the human body and it working in its optimal state. And the latter 2 years talks about pathology, disease, and pharmacology, where you spend most of your medical career in those 2 years, if that makes sense, of what we could do about it. Identify a sickness, what medication, what surgery, what treatment. And that becomes the main current that takes you in your career from residency and beyond. And although we studied things like, biochemistry, nutrients, very little on nutrition, but those things were briefly addressed, I didn't feel that was in my toolkit on a day-to-day basis, at least not major. So what I started wondering was, well, what was the point of all that effort if I'm only emphasizing on the latter part? And when I started coming across more of the holistic mindset, I felt it was more of an integration of all 4 years. It was looking at what ought to be, what should be in a normal state versus what we can kind of tweak and work with if you're dealing with a disease state, or if you do need to use a medication, how to do it safely. But I never wanted to forget, what we're coming into the table with. The human body is a very complex organism. And we need to have a lot of functions to, maintain health. What can we give it to make that health continue and to maintain that state of health? Rather than, and when I say give it, I don't mean necessarily pharmaceutical. I'm talking also about holistic, natural things, diet, nutrition, etc.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening could probably relate to that. You go to a doctor, they run basic tests. If nothing's, clinically wrong, you're told everything is fine, even though you still feel awful. So what is the difference in how you approach then diagnosing and treating patients?
I mean, that's a great question. So a lot of the times, most doctors will order what I would call basic lab tests. You maybe a test you might be familiar with the audience with like Quest or LabCorp, one of these type of companies, and they have a whole range of tests they can do. There's the the ABC test, what's your blood count, thyroid, the normal tests, which are typically done in doctors' offices. And then there's a little bit more of a deeper dive test that not all doctors will use. So the question becomes where is the information? What's the amount of information that I need to draw via your blood to tell me the better, more accurate picture of your health? So I'll give you an example. A lot of doctors today will talk about sugar. So there'll be things like your blood sugar measurement, something called an A1C. And those are typically what's driving a lot of the healthcare discussions. But a little bit of a deeper investigation would include something like, what is your fasting insulin hormone level? That adds so much more layers of information to the question of your health. But it's a simple test that often is not emphasized in traditional visits. So there's things you could do with basic tests that give you a lot more information through known labs like Quest or LabCorp, and there's others. But the question becomes, what it really boils down to the heart of your question is, what's the difference between being healthy and then being well? And in part, when I kind of was naming my company, that was a tradition, a very pointed issue. I spent a lot of time thinking about that, to bring the word health and wellness together. Because many a times when you go to a traditional medical doctor, they'll make sure that you're healthy in the sense of you're alive, you're able to go back to work, but you may not necessarily feel your best version of yourself. You may not feel well. And pairing health and wellness is kind of like a core concept. What we're trying to do is, I want my patient to walk in with a set of problems or symptoms, say, look, I need help with this. Show me a path forward. We collect the right amount of data, figure out how to characterize what you're feeling in a more clear picture, and then use that information to create a game plan moving forward. The goal is the patient leaves feeling well and healthy.
Yeah, that and you brought up insulin and blood sugars. Gut health is a huge topic right now. People are starting to realize that their digestion affects way more than their stomach. So, how big of a role does gut health play in chronic disease?
For us, it's a foundational concept. So that conversation almost always starts with the gut. And that relationship, which is sometimes confusing to people who haven't heard this concept before, is how is something in my abdomen affecting something far away? Maybe my clarity, my focus, skin condition. What's the link between that organ system and another organ system? And where we kind of look at that is to see, how is the gut environment priming other factors in the body, mainly the immune system, of what is the impact on your whole body is if your stomach and intestines are irritated or inflamed by some process that's been ongoing. And that's where a lot of people will feel it, but they don't necessarily link it to what's causing the problem. So they may feel their stomach is a bit off. I have bloating, I have gas, I have IBS. There's different names people can call it. But a lot of commonality is we need to assess something called the microbiome, which is an ecosystem of the gut. And it's just like, I try to explain like an Amazon rainforest. It's a very complex environment, and it's a very important interface between our health and our environment. When you eat your apple or you eat your, whatever you're eating, at some point, it's the outside world is being presented to the inside world. And there are supposed to be barriers and layers of protection, and every section of the gut has its job to do. When there's a disturbance in that very complicated system that we take for granted, you might eat a nice meal and then not think much about it afterwards, other than how great it was. But there are a lot of steps happening going forth for hours after that meal. And if there's any kind of disturbance in that setup, you will start seeing downstream health impacts. They may not necessarily start an hour or two later with something as simple as, say, bloating, but maybe in a time to come, years to come, that you might notice that chronic health conditions are also fed and fueled, no pun intended, by the things that you're eating and how you're eating. And there's other factors to this too. It's not just food. We're in an environment that there's a lot of compounds and chemicals that you almost need an organic chemistry degree to kind of read some labels to understand what's happening out there. It's not simple additives. There's all sorts of compounds that exist out there that can hurt and interact with our gut, which basically throw a monkey wrench into the operation of what's happening in our microbiome.
What are some telltale signs that someone's gut health is wrecked, even if they don't have some of those obvious digestive issues?
So classic thing to focus on is, not to have, the bowel movements. Your bowels will tell you a lot about what's happening. So the form of them, the frequency, how comfortable is your bowel movement. So I sometimes jokingly say that in an ideal situation, you want to have bowel movements you could brag about. Now, not that people go around talking about, but, we have this like great stool chart stuff, like, are you more looser or constipated? And even to this day, after years of doing this, I'm amazed how many people go through life with extreme GI disturbances, bad constipation, or bad diarrhea, or both, but necessarily at the same time. And they just live their lives thinking that this is normal. And that's totally not the case. So bloating, gas distension, constipation, diarrhea, a combination of all of them, these are clues that something is off. Another one would be the stool texture. And if those are a little bit more nuanced, you can notice there's a normal odor that might come in that area. And if there's changes in that odor, those are also clues that's intimately linked to what kind of the gut bacteria is doing in our GI tract. So any factor you could think about related to bowel movements, gas, and kind of the elimination of our food, all of that information is very helpful. effectively, what I would say is outside of you not even thinking about it at all, then there's some version of a problem at a different degree.
What elements might give clue about causation when we look at some symptoms like fatigue or brain fog or joint pain or mood swing disorders, this type of stuff? How might that be indicative of some of these gut issues as well?
So that's a great question. First, I'll try to link the concept of how can variable different things like what you just said, joint pain, fatigue, mood, focus, energy, all of these things. A very kind of common analogy I help people visualize this is I tell people think of a tree. So I'm looking at a tree outside of my office here. A lot of time in medicine, we start at the end of the tree, the branches, the twigs, the leaves. What a lot of functional medicine is doing is something kind of opposite of what traditionally happens. What traditionally happens is you stay at the level of branch management. So maybe the branch I'm on, let's say, is, and I'm a traditional doctor, I'm a heart doctor. So my branch is just the heart. Somebody else's branch is, well, I'm a dermatologist, I do skin. So people tend to stay on their branch, kind of territorial in a way. And there's a lot that can be done that way. I'm not speaking against that. That's one component of medicine that's very necessary, but it's not the entire toolkit. What a functional medicine mindset will do is say, we'll look at those branches and we'll go down to the larger branches in the trunk and then down to the root of the tree. So what's going back as to how we got to this branch, and then we will work backwards to get to the root cause. So literally, when we look at things like what are the source, like a root cause, the gut issues are one of the key ones that are generators of problems that downstream will affect joint health, tension, headaches, whatever ailment you have. So the link is important to conceptually understand that something that's happening in your gut may be contributing to your lack of wellness. And we have, testing that can help bridge that gap to explain in a little bit more detail, things like a microbiome, stool analysis, etc. But conceptually, the first thing that goes wrong is we almost always ask about how is your abdomen doing? How is your gut health? In every patient, I almost always ask about bloating, constipation, gas, diarrhea. All of these things are very important to give us a clue of the health of what your microbiome environment's doing.
So, Dr. Khan, if someone is dealing with those symptoms, where should they start? What's the first thing you would have them do?
So let's say they have the wherewithal to say, I want to do something more holistic, functional medicine. So they kind of got directed to the right place. So that's a huge if. There's a lot of patients I've talked to who've been struggling with these symptoms for years. So let me maybe highlight a common thing that I see. Commonly, a patient will go to the traditional doctor, say I have some issue, and almost reflexively they'll have, some treatments. Maybe they'll blame acidity, maybe try an antacid. Maybe if the symptom persists, they'll see a GI doctor. The GI doctor will be interested in looking inside. So there's something called a scope with a flexible camera, either the top or the bottom, depending on where the problem is. And sometimes that solves the problem. They'll identify an issue that needs to be identified. But oftentimes the patient will go through all that testing, be very patient, and go through all those testing, all the specialists, told a bunch of things that did not change meaningfully their quality of health or the state of, the bloating, the gas, etc. Then those patients, out of frustration, start consulting with a very famous doctor by the name of Dr. Google. And eventually we'll find that, well, why don't you try a holistic route or a functional medicine, etc. So that's kind of how they find it, the path. There are another group of patients who already know what the word functional medicine or holistic health is, and they're coming in a different way. But let's just assume for a second that the average patient did it. Once those symptoms are persisting despite the best standard of care workup, and all the kind of common scary things are eliminated, it's not an ulcer, it's not cancer, it's not anything scary, then why am I remaining with the symptom? And a lot of those patients are kind of told, well, we don't know what it is, good luck. And they're incredibly disheartened, incredibly frustrated, unless they continue the search. If they then find that there is an alternative way of looking at this, more like an ecosystem approach of the gut health, they are then the ones who tend to find, say, a functional medicine doctor, and then begin their conversation of saying, hey, doc, I've had this long history, maybe 1 year, 3 years, sometimes longer, of these problems. Can you help me navigate this? And then that's where we put together the story. All right, we've ruled out kind of dangerous things. We're not dealing with a cancer. Let's now look into more of a chronic disease lens, a chronic lens focus on your problem. To then deconstruct what's going on in your gut health and maybe get to the source of, hey, we've identified perhaps you maybe not be making enough digestive enzyme, or you have an imbalance of gut bacteria, or you got a parasite. These questions are not typically asked in the beginning when the start of the problem, and the symptoms will continue to persist throughout the time. Eventually, when you get to the right kind of mindset, if it's not an acute problem, meaning it's not a branch management issue, then the next issue you should look into is let's go to the root cause. Look at the other side of the tree.
Makes sense. Uh, a lot of people feel exhausted all of the time, but they assume it's just, normal aging. But in reality, a lot of it comes down to hormones, right?
Absolutely. A very critical one. I mean, the buzzword online is something called like adrenal fatigue. A little bit more accurate term would be adrenal insufficiency, but let's just stick with the one that more people might be aware of, adrenal fatigue. The human body really wasn't designed to be chronically inflamed. Uh, an example or analogy I like to say to patients is if you're sitting, in your home and you look outside and you see EMS is called. Let's say there's lights, the blue, the red, and it happens once in a while. You might think to yourself, well, I'm glad they can respond pretty quick if something happens, and I wish that person the best. And you don't necessarily think about it too much. And let's say that's a normal state of affairs. The question I'm raising is, what happens if you look outside your window and every day you're seeing police, fire, ambulance? That analogy is a picture in your mind that I would like you to think of what it looks like, that chronic inflammation in the body. This is not a normal state of affairs. When the body is dealing with a chronic state of inflammation, one of the main systems that has to deal with that is our adrenal axis, something called an HPA axis, a little bit technical. But the adrenals are kind of like the shock absorbers of life that can handle, let's say you're dealing with a major stress event, you got to deal with traffic, you got to make it to a meeting on time, whatever type of life throws at you, or you got a cold, maybe there's a major event that happened in your life. Cortisol is definitely impacted by that adrenal axis. And in a normal functioning state of affairs, the adrenal glands, like a car, when you tap the gas, they will give you more cortisol to handle that stress response, the stress hormone. In situations where you're chronically dealing with inflammation, chronically dealing with a problem, a chronic disease process, the adrenal gland can go into this kind of low power state. We call it adrenal fatigue. And people can definitely feel the impacts of that. I mean, there are multiple ways you can be chronically tired, but this is a huge one that tends to be neglected by traditional medicine. So in my traditional medicine training, we were taught that either the adrenal gland functions or it's in failure. There's not much of a gray area in between. My clinical experience with functional medicine is telling me whatever's been happening in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, let's assume that more and more people are stating they're tired. I'm seeing a lot of adrenal issues as a consequence of an environment that's changed. We're no longer in the same kind of milieu that we had as, when I was a kid, when you were a kid. Food's different, chemicals are different, the amount of chemicals in the world that are released in the world are different. Things like, certain people have talked a lot about like microplastics and PFAS and glyphosate. There's all these terms that are now entering the kind of common vernacular, so to speak, that the question is coming up as, well, what are those chemicals doing to us? And specifically kind of to what we've been talking about is, what's the impact of them on the microbiome environment?
Yeah. So, well, back to the adrenal fatigue and the cortisol. Is how do you figure out if someone's hormones are off, and ultimately, what's the biggest mistake people are making when they try to fix it on their own?
Well, sometimes they'll try to kind of power through. So they'll feel tired. They'll say, "Well, I have a whole pot of coffee in the morning, or I have a subscription to Red. I own stock in Red." So they might enter that route to kind of power over by compensating, and there's energy drinks everywhere you go, in any gas station or whatnot. They're everywhere. There's all sorts of products to help this fatigue. But the question is, what I would kind of share with people is try not to fall into a trap and ask yourself the question, well, why am I so tired? A very common framework that I try to tell people to kind of break that kind of lull that people have. So there's just a product for that. I try to mention things in context of how our ancestral history was. So, wherever your family was 500, 600, 700 years ago, do you think they were sitting in some village, chopping down trees, complaining how tired they were, not able to get work done? No, I don't think that exists in the stories Grandpa told you or our human, literature, the stories of our past, the stories of old. I don't know of people just lying around saying, I need to take a nap all the time, or I need coffee on tap. I think there's something new going on here. And that's more of like, a personal opinion, but I think a lot of people are coming to that opinion is, why are we so tired? So my first point would be not to just say self-medicate with caffeine or energy, to ask yourself the question, well, this isn't normal. And I'd have to say, even for myself, that was another one that I also struggled with, was chronic fatigue, because I myself was chronically inflamed. I didn't know it. But I asked myself the question, I worked a hard day at work, was in the hospital, not at the beginning of my career. But I'd come back and I'd be just calmed down and depleted. I would remember just dive bombing the couch and just taking a 30, 40-minute just shutdown, just a reset for the rest of the evening. And at some point in my head, I'm like, I'm, mid to early 30s. This doesn't seem normal. Like, this shouldn't be normal. I should have more oomph, more reserve no more pep in my step. But I would literally just fully, shut down. And when phones started getting more and more popular, I would have to like doom scroll for like 35, 40 minutes just to shut my brain off to reset. It's almost like a digital nap. Because I didn't want to quite take a full nap. But I started asking myself the question, where's my energy and why am I so tired? And, 30s, 40s are certainly not decades where you should be running out of steam. These are clues.
Yeah, which kind of leads me to the idea of stress. It's a silent killer, right? We all feel it,
Absolutely.
but as you said, most just try to power through, using your words there. And what, Dr. Khan, is happening to the body when we're in this constant state of stress?
So we, technically there's this sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. So I would say it more this way. There's the one part of us that's a go get it, 9 to 5, get it done. There's that element of that nervous system. Then there's another element of the nervous system, which is more of a, sit out by the patio and just kind of stare at the trees and enjoy a nice cup of tea, just zone out. So one side is active, the other side's a little bit more passive, rest and digest, other side maybe more like a fight or flight. I give the analogy for that exact question to, I think of, let's say, a squirrel running around outside. The squirrel is not always running around gathering nuts. There's time for it to rest, sleep, eat, play. There's nothing in nature that's constantly going 24/7 all the time. But for some reason, here in the States, we value and pride ourselves for working beyond overtime, getting 15 million things done all the time, having a schedule that's constantly full. And one of the things that kind of surprise, in the beginning, I didn't think this was possible. But after years of doing this, I realized there's a lot of people who have no concept of how to relax, what that means, what the value of downtime is. There's a very prevalent, I don't know if you'll call it a culture or a mindset, that we need to just keep doing more and more and more and more. And my challenge to that is, where do you see that in nature? We're in the natural environment. Where is anything going at full throttle all day, every day? So if you're not running the machinery of your body in the normal way, right? So if you think of yourself as a car, I'm not driving my engine 24/7, on and on and on. There's times the car is off, it's resting, getting oil changes. There's things happening to the car. Why do we not treat ourselves with the same regard as we would, ourselves, or take wisdom from Mother Nature and realize that there is a time to rest? So let's say all that's said and done, and you're like, hey, doc, you haven't seen my life. You don't know how busy it is. Okay, I can see that point. You're in a busy season of life. If you push yourself beyond the limit, and that's not just the limit, you're also adding in other factors like poor sleep quality, you got blue light everywhere, everyone's on a screen, chemicals, left, right, center, nutrition that's not exactly nutrition anymore. You factor in a couple of these things together, and then you got an adrenal gland that's going to say, look, you keep hitting the gas, I ain't spinning this engine. And those are the people who come in shock. Like, I don't feel myself. I'm tired. What's going on? I can't abuse my body anymore. At some point, something is going to break, and then you're going to go to the mechanic. And for the human body, there's people who will feel when that adrenal fatigue hits, it's a wall they hit. And that is very concerning to people, because at that point, it basically emphasizes that you can no longer take your body's energy system for granted, the adrenal axis for granted.
For sure. So if someone is dealing with a burnout or a high stress situation, where do you start with them? What's a real practical step they can take today?
The simplest thing that I wish I could share to the whole world is, if you're too busy to relax, let's say you're running around, you're in a season of life that's very chaotic, very busy, very demanding. At the bare minimum, put in 5-10 minutes in your schedule, block it into your schedule to breathe. This box breathing technique I tell a lot of people to do if you're just too busy to spend time in nature, stretch, sing, journal, any of those type of mindfulness-based activities. If that's not able to even fathom that, at the bare minimum, breathe. So I talk about this box breathing technique. So if you just imagine like a box here, and then on each side of the box is a 4 count. So simply breathe into a count of 4, nice, slow, steady beat. Hold your lungs full for 4. Exhale slow and controlled for 4. And hold an empty lungs for 4. And then you run that box for 5-10 minutes, and almost like a meditative practice. And you can do this when you're walking to your next meeting, driving your car, waiting for your next Zoom call, whatever is about to happen, try to piggyback that in. And what that does to your nervous system, it takes you a little bit out of the 9 to 5, I'm going to go find my nuts, over into the rest and digest and turn you into a bit of Huckleberry Finn for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking overall straw in the mouth, staring at the clouds. And I'm trying to bring that stark visualization to let people kind of understand that if you can't do the full relax, fine, but at least please start with breathing.
Yeah, no, that's a great tool for the tool belt there. A lot of what you do is about prevention rather than just fixing things once they're broken. So what do you think is the future of healthcare if more people start adopting this mindset?
So I think the future is, the social media is a very powerful tool. It's allowing us to have this conversation. It's allowing people to learn about things that wouldn't come through the traditional, gates or portals of knowledge, so to speak. And people are becoming aware that something's not adding up. We're spending more and more on healthcare. Are people feeling better? And what? No, the answer is clearly no. So word is spreading. Well, hey, you should ask your doctor about these tests. Like, for example, insulin is a very important thing to ask about. But there's many, many things to look into, and even the concept of a holistic, functional type of doctor. I think that's going to start entering the mainstream. It probably already has in many ways. That we're going to now have conversations about things that would never have been seen light of day. Methylene blue, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. There's other things that can be now that conversation now introduced. One thing that I like to emphasize, I think people understand this, but what's not taught in medicine at all is the business of medicine. So I learned nothing about how capital flows in, say, between research, pharma, government, all that mystery box for me. But therein lies the problem. If you're going to study something that's good for you, let's even talk about the new kid on the block that's getting a lot of buzz is the methylene blue for energy. Who's going to study a compound that doesn't make any money for the person studying it? Where's the incentive to set up a randomized multi-center control trial that might cost millions of dollars and years of effort to basically talk about a product that says, yes, a product that you could buy for less than $100, but even less, is going to make XYZ impact. But who's going to generate the revenue on that? The answer is not the big pharma. Therefore, the trial doesn't exist. So a lot of times people will ask me, well, where's your XYZ study on this? And people in the functional medicine space use this term as N equals 1 a lot, meaning works for me. I don't have 30,000 people who have studied this, that's been sponsored by, say, a big company to look into specific aspects of the microbiome. I would love for that to happen. I would love for that to change in the future at the top level of government. But for right now, I think people need to understand is that the outcomes for health and wellness are skewed by who's defining what health and wellness is. I would make the claim that the definition now is more about keeping you alive enough to go to work and keep working and cranking the lever. That to me is, I think, what the definition of definition of health is. Health and wellness is more what everyone's aspiring to, is I want to be the best version of myself. And there's no incentive for that to happen at a large scale. Unfortunately, and I hope and pray that changes soon. But I think that concept is entering into the general population at large, where people are understanding the best of our, the incentives for the best for our health are not necessarily aligned with the people who are pushing what are health best case practices for health and wellness, or health rather, not wellness.
So what's the one thing you wish more people knew about their own health before they wound up in your office?
The capacity for the body to heal itself is incredible. It's important to know what you need to keep away from your body. That could be unique to individuals. Changes between you and me, for example, even if let food be thy medicine, if that was to be, let's say, a foundation that you're going to work with. And effectively, if you want to minimize pharmaceuticals on the front of your toolkit and keep it more in the back, but then what are you left with? That supplements, food, natural things. Food is a huge one that's often overlooked. If food is going to be your medicine, you have to know how to eat for your body. So you need to identify that maybe what you might be eating is healthy for you may not be good for me. Maybe what I might be eating, vice versa, may not be good for you. So identifying what needs to stay away from your body is huge. Identifying what you need you don't have enough of that you need to replete is also very important. And then once you start giving your body what it needs to work with, to do its own thing, to kind of maintain what's called homeostasis, being in a good state of health. The body wants to be healthy. If you then maintain that, you've maybe started over half the battle is completed. The core of the version of functional medicine that I like is not necessarily getting lost in the nuances and details and being on, 3 suitcase bags full of supplements a day. That's not what my focus is. My focus is on big picture. How did our ancestors live? How do we do this simply? And I was reflecting on this in the last year. Another way of how I would frame it is, how do I protect you from modern society? So modern society might give us the ability to have this conversation, grid, electricity, all this stuff that's all around us is great. But at what cost? What does that come with? Compounds and chemicals and the exposures of which we're experiencing now didn't exist for our parents or grandparents. The environment has changed. So how do we protect ourselves, our loved ones, our families from those environmental changes that are not talked about, that are not emphasized, except maybe on social media, etc. And that to me is a very foundational first step. You can then enter and do a lot more nuances and details, absolutely. But as far as the big picture affecting most people, we need to identify what's hurting your body that's on board that ought not to be there, and what are you craving for, what are you starving for that needs to be there.
Wow. Yeah. Dr. Khan, this has been an eye-opener for people listening who want to start taking control of their health. What is the number one first step they should take?
I think a great first step I like is paying attention to what you're putting in your body or on your body. Don't take for granted that just because it's approved to be sold to you, it means it's necessarily good. Looking at how food is produced, how food historically been produced, and what the difference is, this is like big agro. I think that's an important question to start looking into processed food. So one kind of assumption that I had, I remember when I was a young one, was I thought that if it's in the grocery store, obviously it's safe, right? They wouldn't sell it to you if it was bad, right? And I naively thought that for many, many years until I started getting a little bit more curious about reading labels. So maybe a great place to start for the average, the uninitiated, so to speak, is start reading what you're putting into your body. Almost like take it for like a security check, like you're running like a restaurant or a club or something, and whatever he's entering, you want to have an eyeball like, oh yeah, that's just water and natural food flavor. That's fine. What's polysorbate 80? All these strange chemicals. I mean, you go on for hours just listing all the things that are in it. I don't know. I don't know what the long-term impact of those are. I don't know what the impact is of all those together on us. One way I kind of do things to help simplify that, if that question starts arising, that's where I would start, is to look into what is your body sensitive to? And we have certain tests that can help kind of clarify that. But the first step before you even ask that question is you yourself start reading and try to understand what's entering your body. And if you feel you need a chemistry degree to interpret that, that's a great start. That thought is a great start.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Dr. Khan, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
So we have a website, internalhealingandwellnessmd.com, or simplified is www.ihawmd.com. We have our physical clinic located here in Shenandoah. It's on Ed English, just north of the Portofino Mall. So that's 255 Ed English, Suite A. And then you can always feel free to give us a call. Our number is 281-475-7845. And we'd be happy to talk with people in person. And we also do offer virtual consultations as well.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for joining us to chat today, Dr. Khan. We look forward to future conversations. Folks, if you got value from this episode, share it, tag us, let us know your biggest takeaway. Stay sharp, stay strong, stay aligned. Till next time, keep up the good vibes.
And thank you for having me.